So we interrupt our regularly scheduled programming to bring you this special edition of Travels with Boat from a place called Ban Nam Khem in Panga province. It's on the Andaman Sea, which you can see behind me. I expect that most of you know what happened here exactly 20 years ago on December 26, 2004. That was the date of the giant earthquake and the tsunami that followed it. But believe it or not, I have actually met people who have no idea that the tsunami happened. In fact, I've actually met people who don't even know what a tsunami is. I find that absolutely incredible, but trust me, it's happened. So, for those of you who are slightly clueless, I'll just remind you that down the coast here and off into the Andaman Sea in North Sumatra in Indonesia, that's about, I would think, 100, 150 kilometers down that way. There was an earthquake which measured somewhere around 9.0, 9.1, 9.2 on the Richter scale. It doesn't really matter, it was huge. And what happened is that the earthquake pushed up the bed of the sea, which created a giant wave which went out in all directions all around the Indian Ocean. Not only towards Indonesia and Thailand and Malaysia, but all the way around, right across to Africa. This giant tsunami wave just pushed its way across the Indian Ocean. And to call it a wave is a little bit misleading because, you know, waves reach the shore. There's some little ones going splosh right now. On a 3-meter wave, you could imagine would make a big splosh. But the reality is the sea was actually 3 meters higher behind the wave. And so as the sea reached here, there was nothing to stop it. Unfortunately, here in the Khao district, the land is very flat for several kilometers inland. So when the wave or the sea, the raised sea reached here, it just kept pushing all the way inland. And that figure of 3 meters may not be accurate. That's kind of an estimate of the whole rising of the sea in the Indian Ocean. It's estimated that here the wave was actually 10 meters high. And on some of the islands out in the Andaman Sea, it was 20 meters high. That's just almost unimaginable. Can you imagine standing here and seeing a 10 to 20 meter wave coming straight at us? Terrifying. Now, with this being one of the worst places that was hit in Thailand, there is actually a tsunami memorial over behind you. And we'll take a walk over there in a moment. So everyone who lives in a coastal area around the Andaman Sea considers themselves to be a tsunami survivor. We're the lucky ones. Now, the first time I came here, which was probably 9, maybe 10 years ago, I visited the memorial and I started chatting with this guy who was just sweeping up and doing some general gardening. He told me that at the time that the tsunami hit, he was at home, which he said was about 5 or 6 kilometers inland. And like he did every morning, he put his young son on the front of his motorbike and he drove out here to where his son's school was. And then he rode back inland to go to his place of work, and that's when he learned about the tsunami. And sad to say that when the tsunami hit, the school was totally destroyed and all of the teachers and pupils were killed. And I tell you, by the time he'd finished that story, there wasn't a dry eye between us. Now, since it's stinking hot here, I'm just going to move back to Bert because he's in the shade. Of course, normally I'm used to temperatures that are 30-something, but the last few weeks we've had very, very cool weather and a lot of torrential rain and a lot of flooding. So, whereas this is a very nice, welcome bit of sunshine, it's stinking hot. As I say, everyone has a tsunami story. I'll save mine until the end, but I can just talk about some people I know. I had some friends who at the time were living on Koh Phi Phi, which is again out there in the Andaman Sea further south from here. And they had a restaurant which was also their home right on the beach. And in a way they were doubly lucky because first of all they saw the wave coming, so they were able to escape. But also Koh Phi Phi is quite mountainous, so they were able to escape to a high point. And so far so good, so they didn't die, but they just sat and watched everything that they owned completely destroyed. And in case it should ever happen to you, keep in mind the fact that when the wave hits, all the boats are destroyed. They're either destroyed or they're washed several kilometers inland. So it's going to be a long time before you're rescued. No country has enough helicopters to cover the whole coast to find people who are stranded on hillsides. So it was more than a week before they were rescued and taken over to the mainland. But even when they got to the mainland, all they had was the clothes that they were wearing. They had nothing else in the whole world. And strange to say, they are now living on a different tropical island in the Andaman Sea, right next to the beach, with another restaurant. And I have to say, if that had happened to me, I'd be living on a mountaintop somewhere. Also, I have some Malaysian friends who are on vacation here. This was Christmas time, don't forget. I think they were in Phuket, again, down that way. And they were also lucky in that they saw the wave coming and they managed to get out of their hotel and started running towards the hillside. But this was a man and his wife and very young daughter. And the man, in his infinite stupidity, which he freely admits, decided to go back into the hotel to rescue his notebook computer. And that was just as the wave hit. And he's very lucky to be alive. He was injured, not seriously. But the problem then was he had no idea what had happened to his wife or daughter. He's in hospital in Phuket and they disappeared somewhere. And he didn't know whether they were dead or alive. But it took 2 days before they both managed to make contact with a relative in Kuala Lumpur, and then they exchanged positions and managed to get back together. Very lucky. So in a moment we'll just take a walk over to the memorial, and I have cheated. I've just been over there to see what condition it's in. And I can't quite believe that it hasn't been maintained in the 20 years since the tsunami. I don't actually know when they built the memorial, obviously not 20 years ago, but it was certainly here when I came here 10 years ago, and it's in worse condition now than it was then. And I have to quote something to you. In 2016, which is 8 years ago, there was an article in the Bangkok Post which stated, "An outdoor museum is going to be built in Panga in memory of the thousands of lives lost in the tsunami that ravaged the province in 2004. The construction of the museum, to be overseen by the Culture Ministry, is set to begin next year at Ban Nam Khem fishing village in Takwa Pa district, which is where we are now. And that's a place already popular amongst tourists wishing to learn about the devastating impact the tsunami had. And the Tsunami Museum project, which will be built with a budget of 64.8 million baht, comes at a time when many tourists to Takwa Pa have been complaining that the authorities have failed to maintain the area. So what happened to it? What happened to the 64.8 million baht? I have no idea." Something called the Tsunami Victim Cemetery, and there's a little plaque alongside here showing all of the nationalities who are buried here. Just have a quick look over the wall here. I have to say this place is in better condition than the last time I came. They have actually cut the grass, so it looks a little better than usual. For some reason the place is protected by a giant metal gate. Can't think why. I don't think people are going anywhere anytime soon. However, I think the gate moves. Let's see if we can pull it back. Oh, yes we can. I can just sneak in through that gap. Those are waves, I assume. Apparently 370 of these graves are unidentified victims. And they have been enclosed in lead and concrete to preserve their DNA. However, I can't imagine anyone coming here and saying, "I think my Uncle Fred is one of these. Can you dig him all up and check his DNA?" I don't see that happening. It looks like these have little plates on them. So presumably they know who these are. No, he's just E1. Well, cemeteries are never happy places, but this one seems particularly sad and unloved. At the end there's a whole bunch of abandoned buildings. Goodness knows what they were supposed to be. Well, this is depressing. Let's go somewhere else before someone decides to close the gate and lock us in. And then there's this. We're about 25 kilometers south of the main memorial where we were earlier. And there's this thing, which I suppose is designed to look like a wave or something like that, but it's equally broken down, not very impressive at all. And if we swing around the other way, you'll notice a police boat T813. And the day that the tsunami struck, there were members of the royal family staying in La Flora Resort, which is about 1.5 kilometers from here on the beach. And because the royal family was there, or members of the royal family, they had a police protection, and this boat was about 2 kilometers offshore, making sure that the royal family was secure. And when the tsunami hit, as I mentioned earlier, it's not just a wave, it's the whole sea pushing inland, and it pushed the police boat to where it's sitting right now. And apparently the local people are not too impressed with that. It's a constant reminder of what happened there. So from everything we've seen today, I just have the impression that they might as well scrap it all and forget that it happened. Or build a proper memorial, which is a fitting reminder of the number of people who died. Anyway, that's just my opinion. So let's finish the tsunami story somewhere nicer. This is Bang Lud Beach, one of the many beaches in the Khao Lak district. I promised to tell you my tsunami story, so I'll do that now before we wrap this up. I was on the island of Penang at the time, which is a few hundred kilometers that way. And in some ways, I consider myself to be an earthquake survivor rather than a tsunami survivor. We were on the top floor, or the 12th floor, of an apartment building, which Malaysians prefer to call condo. And when the quake hit, it was early morning. And I'd just made coffee, and we were sitting having the coffee, and I suddenly realized that the coffee in the mug looked like there was a Japanese fighting fish trying to get out of there. There were just waves on top of it like this. And then the building started swaying. And it's hard to imagine, but the doors were going from fully open to fully closed and fully open to fully closed as the building swayed. And of course, the obvious thing is to try to get out of there. But we realized this was going to be pretty impossible because it was reckoned, I read afterwards, that the tops of the buildings were swaying by 2 meters. And that's like from over here to over here somewhere and over here back again. And it would have been totally impossible to walk down 12 flights of stairs with the building swaying like that. So we just sat there and watched and waited for the ceiling to fall in, because I was convinced that the whole building was just going to collapse in on itself. But it never did. And amazingly, when they did an inspection afterwards, by the way, this went on for 2.5 minutes, just sitting there watching the building swaying like this and the coffee sploshing around and the doors going like this. They reckoned that the building suffered no damage whatsoever, which I think is something of a miracle. And then, of course, the tsunami arrived. We could see these giant waves coming in off the sea. And at the time, I had a very early digital camera, which was disgustingly low resolution, but it did take photographs. So I rushed to get that, and I took as many photographs as I could. And then I spent the rest of the afternoon trying to upload them to the Star newspaper, which is one of Malaysia's English language newspapers. I was using one of those ancient dial-up modems, which was extremely slow. And of course, they hadn't asked for them, and I had no idea what they were going to do with them. Next morning, we went out to try to buy a newspaper, and there had none been delivered to our area. So my son and myself, we jumped in the car and we went about 10 kilometers back towards the capital city, Georgetown, and tried to find a newspaper. And this wasn't very easy because the roads were literally covered in garbage and fishing boats, and it was a question of dodging all of the obstacles as we tried to reach the town. And then, to my surprise, when we looked at the Star newspaper and looked at the front page, there was one of my photographs. And you can see it here. They had printed the photograph with the caption, "Waves of Death," which of course they were, but it was shocking to see that. And I have to assume I was the only one who sent them any photographs, and those were the only photographs they had, because they printed several more on the inside pages. I guess that was my 15 minutes of fame. So we'd actually planned to stay in Penang for about 10 days, but it just became unpleasant because there were constant sirens of ambulances and police vehicles zipping along the beach road, and there were helicopters overhead, and there were bodies washing up. So we just bailed out and went home, which was a great shame, but it just was too unpleasant. So anyway, that's my story, and I made this video as a kind of permanent record of what happened here and what happened to me. I guess it will stay online until some new AI algorithm decides to delete it. So for now, it's goodbye for Bert, and next time we'll try to find somewhere a little more pleasant, and it's goodbye from me. Goodbye.